All right. Oh, we settled down. That's great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk about designing business and the future. And I actually have a fantastic panel, so I'll probably say very little and let them do all the talking. So we'll start over there. Ernesto Quinteros is Chief Design Officer for J&J, right? And you've been there for about 3 years now?
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Miguel McKevy, right? Did I do that right?
McKelvey, yeah.
Oh, damn, I practiced.
Sorry.
And you are one of the founders of WeWork, but also a designer,
Yeah.
right? Okay. And then Bree Pettis, you've got a sordid long history, right? Founder of MakerBot, but you have some very cool things you're working on. And also, I wouldn't say have a traditional design background, but you have a very creative background, right? Okay. Well, and my name's Doreen Lorenzo, and I've been in this thing called the design industry for about 150 years. And I am really excited that I get to go to these conferences now and actually talk about design, because when I started, nobody ever talked about design. It was like a thing that people who were all dressed in black, usually, would like sit in the back of the room, or sometimes they were allowed in the building and they would talk about it. So the fact that we're talking about design as something that's important to business, actually it's something that's important to our society, to me is, we've come a long way. But that being said, my concern, because I always have to have a concern, my concern is it's going to turn into a fad if we don't really understand the value and how to do it right, and how to make it into something that's really valuable and really useful. And somebody just asked me, are you going to talk about design or design thinking? So I'm just going to say something right now. The concept of design thinking, and you guys jump in, don't listen to me, is really just it's a methodology. It's a problem-solving methodology, which is something that designers have used for many years. It's how they solve a problem. And it's human-centered. So remember, we're talking a lot about robots, and we're talking a lot about man versus machine, or man and machine. But this is about the human side. This is about understanding people and getting those insights and understanding then how to solve those problems for them.
It's not loud enough.
Oh, I'm not loud enough. Okay. That's the first time. Tell that to my family. So that being said, maybe I just going to throw out some questions to you guys and you go with it. But Ernesto, I'm going to start with you. You became first Chief Design Officer at J&J?
First enterprise-wide Chief Design Officer.
Okay.
At J&J. Yep.
All right. So what does that entail? Like that business has been around for a long time. What are they trying to do? What does that entail? When they say that, what does that mean? That's just not about designing packaging here.
That's right. Yeah, so we're a very large company. We are the world's largest healthcare organization, 130 years old, 130,000 employees with 3 sectors. And it was recognized that design could bring a new dimension to how we innovate, develop products and solutions. And they designated the idea of having it very high up in the organization. So Sandy Peterson, she's a worldwide chairman. She's also on the board of directors at Microsoft. So she really gets tech and innovation, and she designated this working with our CEO to create this role. So when you say, what does it entail? It's a lot more than packaging. It's a lot more now about experiences. So I'm responsible for...
Tell us about something that got your blood flowing recently.
My blood flowing recently. Well, I'll answer the question the way I was going to answer it. Sorry. So we're involved with everything from facility design. So we're responsible for the design of all of our different sites around the world. Our digital solutions, so even all the portals that our employees use. We're mapping out the employee experience journey, and we're partnering with HR. And yes, we're doing all those things like device design and packaging. So it covers the whole spectrum.
So, Miguel, when you hear that, that really influences what you do and what you've created. How does that influence, what you're doing? I mean, we talked a little bit before about the concept of productivity and how that influences, the spaces and what you've done. Because
really designed a business around helping people work, right, and bringing people and creating communities. So when you listen to that, because design is obviously, again, more than the artifact, how does that impact you?
I think the cool thing about what's happening in design, and especially what we've built our business on, is sort of the human potential and unlocking in multiple ways how people can sort of become not just productive, which I think is really cool, but more excited about life in general because of the time that they spend working. So I think we've all seen the examples of work that are obviously depressing and soul-sucking and terrible. I think applying design thinking to workplace and to the concept of work is actually really the opposite of that. And so I think we've been in buildings before where, we're in, say, a multi-tenant environment, and, you could set your watch by the time that the people who are not in WeWork space rush out of the building at the end of the day, right? Whereas, a lot of our members are more, engaged with their work in a way that's more diverse, has hopefully multi-dimensionality in terms of how they as people are connecting to the work. So I think the interesting thing about putting design in a big organization hopefully would be to be thinking about how are you actually engaging the human beings who are there in a more expansive way. And if it has to do with actual business objectives, that's great. But if it also has to do with just thinking about them as what do they need to grow and change and evolve, that's much more exciting.
People love being in your spaces. Like, you've designed a thing that's attractive. It attracts people. They want to stay there. When you thought about the whole thing, and now that you've had some time to deploy it and it's working, did you do something that surprised you, or were there any catches that did you make any glaring mistakes that were obvious in retrospect but not in the front, or what was this? How did you tweak that to get it right?
Well, I think the first thing is that we had some fundamental premises that were interesting. Like, we made all the walls glass, which now doesn't seem that weird, but at the time, putting people who were not working for the same company, adjacent to each other, in glass walls, we, as many things you've talked about in internet or community design on the web, a lot of that working has to be the people who are a part of it being willing to work within that system and be, realize they have a responsibility to each other. So one of the things that's cool is when we first started, we would hear things like if someone, again, two unrelated companies, but they're sitting side by side, if one person's leaving the office at 4 o'clock, their neighbor would be like, "What's up? Is it a half day?" So, and then if someone was gone for a week, they would question "Where have you been?" And what you realize is that they actually had some accountability to each other just because they had adjacency. And that in a way creates a relationship that perhaps leads to more productivity. And then, again, productivity broadly defined, primarily in the sense of being motivated and excited about what you're doing, And I think part of that is if you're not amongst people who are giving you that kind of energy, then you're not going to have it. So designing a space where the positive energy is flowing amongst people, certainly I think should be all of our ambition. But I don't know that we know the formula yet. We're just always iterating and trying and thinking.
But I think you bring out a really good point, which is, and I'd love to hear from you, Ernesto, and obviously we'll get to you, Bree. We'll always get to you. Is you have to, I think that's the issue around design is people think you do it and then you put it out there and it's great and you walk away, right? Successful design is in constant iteration. And so you're talking about doing that in your business. At a company like J&J, right, you've got to constantly now, you're introducing this concept of constant
So I'll
iteration.
tell you a moment when my blood boiled. Okay. So it was the first few months on the job. I'm in a meeting in New Brunswick, and we're talking about different sites because we have over 1,000 sites. Okay, and every different architectural firm can come in with their own subjective opinion on what that site should be, and maybe they're doing it for their portfolio because they're trying to get their next client. Okay. But we have to think about what's right for our organization, what we're trying to do, right? And so we came up with this method, this model, we call it Essence right now, and it does exactly what you're talking about. We have different vectors that we look at it through. All the innovation that's happening in the health and wellness space of there's learnings that are coming out every few days, right? Same with technology, it keeps changing, emerging. How do those vectors continuously get updated as we go and renovate each new site? So we're trying to create a living model, a living organism, and we still partner with architectural agencies, but we give them some guidelines on what matters to us. And brand is really a big part of this too. We're one company, and we acquire lots of companies all the time. We acquired a $30 billion company in January. We have to assimilate them into Johnson & Johnson. So these are the methods that we're taking.
Bree, you, as I said, you're not a trained designer, so a little different than Miguel and Ernesto, but you obviously have immersed yourself in the design world. What have you learned? What are some of the takeaways? How do you use it?
I mean, I love iteration. So I spent a couple years doing launching a project every week. And so when you have to launch a project every week at noon on Friday, you get into this routine of like, okay, let's do something, figure out the landscape, figure out a way to do something different, build it, film it, package it up, and then go. And
Sorry, that's post MakerBot?
Pre-MakerBot.
Oh, pre-MakerBot. Okay.
so I ended up basically, at the end of that period of my life, I created the Cult of Done Manifesto, which is basically like all about just getting something done. This like rapid iteration, being able to get to a version of done so that you can iterate quickly. And then with MakerBot, it ended up being a machine that embodied that same spirit of iterate quickly so that you can push your ideas forward. And it turns out like most people who are in the sort of engineering world are like, okay, I'm going to design something, I'll come up with a spec, and then I'll overbuild it to make sure that it meets the spec, and you end up building something super expensive and having to find business models that really screw your customer to justify all that expense. And then instead, another option, which is just as good, but is, I'm probably less popular in sort of elite design circles for this, is you can just try something. It'll be a disaster, but if you're willing to keep trying, you can bang your head against this wall, and whether it takes a day or a week, you will get through it to the other side, and that's a design solution, right? So this, in terms of like, so I like the iteration thing is what I really jam on.
So Ernesto, you're saying yes. Miguel, you're saying yes. So
Oh, yeah.
what do you,
Absolutely, everything we do
so
is
how do you do it? Why is that important to?
Well, so there's a lot of smart people that have deep knowledge, let's say in any one of these care categories, the sciences, right? But you have to bring up this outside point of view with consumerism that's moving into healthcare and shake it up. So we'll put teams together that are cross-functional. There'll be people that are very knowledgeable, let's say it's baby category, and people that don't know anything about babies, and put them together, and they poke at each other. They throw out the question, what makes your blood boil? Let's say, I mean, they don't do that. But we do these sprints, and sometimes we use a WeWork space here in New York, so thank you for having us. But we're building sites that have that same physical attribute as well. But sometimes
That's
you need
not
to get
what
outside.
he wants to hear.
I know. But I'm glad he's there. I'm glad it's really helping a lot of companies to start working in a different way. But it's becoming part of our DNA now, and we have a lot more different parts of our company that are slowly embracing it. But it's good.
Well, I think that the idea that there's process and space, and that the thinking about how innovation is happening seems like it's more broad now, and I think it's important to realize like every company could have their own culture, but the input points I think are now flowing into companies that previously didn't have them at all. So like if you look at a big corporation at a big campus, perhaps they did have an architect who came in, and that architect was redesigning a portion of the campus, but it wasn't also designing a business process, right? Like it was singular in how the effect would happen. And so I think what's cool now is there seems to be a lot more holistic thinking, because this startup mentality, innovation, iteration is sort of infecting the business processes in a more meaningful way. And then places like WeWork, which is great, are actually infecting the design of space. And so you're putting these different influences together. And we're fine if like, we would be happy if everyone built WeWork-inspired spaces on their campus or in their headquarters, because we just think it's better for humans, And I think similarly, these business processes that unlock people's creativity are better for humans too. So the movement, I think, is good.
We talk a lot about the business process, and again, I think people talk about design and they often talk about the thing, like producing the thing. We're really talking about changing systems, right?
Systems and experience design.
Experience, yeah. So is that a new movement? Is that something that now is catching on? How do we make sure?
Well, the
Because I think
first-
that's part of redesigning the future of what business and actually society looks like, is around this whole systems and experiences.
So the first commercial success is the iPod. It's a kind of a tired story now, but it was the first ecosystem design that looks at, the whole retail experience, the device experience, the out-of-box packaging experience, and the digital, the app, the download of the music, everything. First time anyone really looked at it so holistically. Lots of companies now are doing that. We're doing that as well. Of course, we don't have as many touch points per se, but I think that's the movement, and that's people are looking at experiences. So if you know what the core experience that you're trying to create, it influences the different touch points, be it the package or the product. It shouldn't start with the product and let it infect the other pieces. It should have more of a centralized experience you're trying to drive.
Well, I think also the credibility of the product, I think, which people care about much more now, is less so just the result, just the thing they get in their hands when they buy it, but what happened before to get it there. And I think that's, an important change, is that even at Apple, I think some of us, while we might still have an iPhone, perhaps we thought about the process that they used to get there. And they went through, their evolution where they got a lot of feedback on, say, the environmental responsibility, and they modified their product because people were looking at the back end of that. And I think now you see many more companies where their marketing is actually, it's not just this object is shiny and beautiful, but it's also has a backstory of how it got in your hands that matters. And I think if you think about it as a consumer, like, if you actually were like, the people that made that product really loved their job and they were super happy making it, you would feel better about buying it, And so I think that's like a cool evolving concept. And the more those stories are told, the more the design story is told, and less as like a singular, I'm Steve Jobs and I made this, but here's the whole backstory of the thousands of people that helped create this thing. That's the design story that we now should be paying attention to and believe in.
So with my current gig, I make meaningful things, and I spent like 2 years asking everybody I met what they had in their life that's meaningful. And you could just in your head imagine something you have in your life that's meaningful to you. You'd run into a burning building to get it, kind of a thing. And one of the weird things that I found is about 60% of the people I talked to, more than half, didn't have anything in their life that was value. They'd pull out and be like, maybe my phone? And I'm a crap hound. Like, I'm an antique hunter. I love things. I love the stories of things, the meaning of things. So I'm like, what is going on here? And I think one of the interesting challenges for the modern age is that we're living in a commoditized, industrialized, IKEA-ized world where you can literally get anything where the race to the bottom has happened in every fucking category. And so if you want something, you can figure it out, It's not like scarcity doesn't exist for the most part. So how do you, if you're me, how do I make things in that environment? And then how do I make it worth, how do I overcome the sort of minimalism movement, which is huge, except that we measure everything by how people buy things, so it's invisible.
Well, to me, someone asked me that. I don't know if it was in the context of you. I don't remember. But someone asked me that question of if I had owned meaningful things. And I was embarrassed to say that, now I can't even, I'm scared to say it. But I actually have a spoon that IKEA made, like, I think 5 or 6 years ago, which for some reason, the form of that spoon is just the most, like, pleasing for me to eat with, and I only have one of them. So I have a whole other set of
Do you bring it
dishes.
with you? Do you travel with it?
I don't travel because it's too
precious.
Too precious. I might lose it. But I literally choose that spoon every day to do everything at home. But the one thing that I do, aside from that spoon, when that question was asked, when I was thinking about it is, how am I making my purchasing decisions? Because I'm in the context of WeWork, I'm constantly looking for products that were made by, people who have a story where I can connect. And so, like, my toothbrush is a startup. that has some new idea about how toothbrushes should work. You know, like I have like a Soma water filter because I know the guys who, you know, made that. It's like, and so the objects that exist, it's not about the object anymore.
Relationship.
It's much more, yeah, like what's my relationship to how that thing got in my apartment? And it's not that I would run in and save it from a burning fire, but I really care about those people. Like I know that I value the fact that I'm giving them my money and that therefore they're able to follow their passion and do what they love in their life, you know?
Well, that gets down to there's this real movement in design and design for business now around purpose, right? So people we know, I mean, this is fact on fact, right? That we know that new generation coming in, millennials and whatever, want purpose. I think actually we all want purpose in our lives, to be honest with you. So I don't just limit it to them, but we know that. How does that play into what you do and how you design things? I mean, knowing that that's what's going to drive your employees, it's going to drive people that go there. How does that play into what you're doing?
I mean, I think right now it's a super interesting time because we're just coming off the industrial age. Everything is commoditized, as I mentioned. And more than ever, relationships are our most important thing. What do you spend the most time doing? The data all says we spend most of the time staring at a little screen, checking on our relationship updates of other people, right? Like, that's how we're spending our time, is trying to connect to other people in this super lonely, isolating way. But still, like, and one of the things I would ask people, like, what's the most important thing you have? And they would immediately just be like, my family, or my husband, or my wife, or my kids. And I'm like, no, I meant like a thing. And they were like, no, these are the most important things in our lives tend to be relationships by like a factor of 10 over things too. So the sort of idea of like building for relationships, I think that's the frontier where designers will win.
Yeah, no, how does that play into
Yeah,
what you're
I'd
doing?
like to take a pass at that. So we're a very purpose-driven company, and we have this document, our credo, that you can look up online. And when you read it, it has all the design thinking elements in it. It's very empathetic. It's very people-centered. So if it's the patients, the nurses, the doctors, the communities that we serve or that we have our business in, it's very people-centered. And so that plays out in everything that we do. And so I don't think we could last as many years as we have if we didn't have this purpose. And so when we are hiring new designers and they look at working for us or another company, they get really excited about having impact on humanity.
Yeah.
And that's purpose. Mm-hmm. So it's about having positive impact on people. So I think there's a lot to be said about purpose. A lot of companies, I think they get it, they embrace it, and some don't give it as much. I think it's a miss.
Well, I think you got to live it. I mean, I think it's one thing about saying it, but I think you have to live it and you have to feel that. And again, you're saying like, okay, why are you talking about purpose when we're talking about designing business in the future? Because the reality is this is all design. I think that's the part I want to get through here is like, this is all part of design, is not just thinking about the thing we're going to produce, right, or the system we're going to make, but it's really looking at the totality of how everybody, all the interactions and everything that's going on. Clearly, Miguel, that's a big part of you bringing all these companies together. I mean, I've been to enough WeWork spaces where there's like this friendship and community that begins to form, right? And businesses get bought by other. I mean, it's kind of an interesting little ecosystem you built.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our environment, we're lucky to be surrounded by many people who they're in that place in their existence where they've gone through a process of trying to arrive at purpose. They maybe have detached from other ways of working because it wasn't fulfilling to them. And so I think not for every company or every member, but many of them have arrived at the point where they're like, I need to have value in what I do, and they're working towards that. I need, like, if I'm going to come to work every day, it has to be more than just, a job. It has to be, creating your life's work. It has to be, making a life, not just a living, which are the things that we talk about. And I think that is something that when you're in a place where people are doing that, then there's an energy that flows and people feel a vibe that is different. But at the same time, I think it's now growing out of that in a way that's really positive, and I think you see, just in the model. And like, it's awesome that you guys use our space, but what happens is some companies, large companies, put a small division into one of our buildings, and all of a sudden it's like igniting a whole new way of thinking just by being in a different environment, and now that could become the most coveted place to be in, in the whole sort of facilities, a set of resources for a company. And I think that's where, again, like, it's awesome if we can house all those people, but just the fact that they can come in, they can see, wow, I'm surrounded by all these people who are actually like ignited and on fire about what they're doing, and then that energy flow can hopefully, come back to larger organizations. And we've been in really cool conversations with CEOs who, are of huge organizations who walk through our space and say, wow, I realize this is different than what I'm doing, that what our company is doing, and now I feel a greater obligation to bring it back, So I hope that from a design perspective, it's not necessarily literal, like they're going to build a WeWork, but they're actually going to be thinking with a human-centered approach, which would be, that's a much bigger impact than just our few buildings around the world.
I think there's another value besides, physical space can affect behavior, right? And when you rent a space, that also can affect your behavior because you're working within windows of time, maybe. And when you work within windows of time, that speaks this iterative approach of doing kind of these sprints, right? So I think there's a lot of value that happens just from a new space, but also just, okay, we're going to go in there for a period of time, we're going to do this thing, and then we're going to get out. It drives behavior that way too.
I really resonated with something, Miguel, you said a while back around, I feel really dedicated to unlocking human potential. So when you said that, I was like, oh, yes, I totally feel you. One of my hobbies, maybe, for the last decade has been how do we design society? So, like, I wanted to buy Iceland. The Russians got it first, right? A year ago, I started really watching Venezuela closely because they've been in a situation where they've had a left dictatorship, and it's a year ago I was like, okay, they're so fucked. It's the potential to build a new type of society. What's it's gonna look like in a post-free market capitalistic world or a post-socialism dictatorship? They have the open space to design something new. And then over the last year, it's just descended into Mad Max hell, where there's no medicine, there's no food, and everybody's dying. So one of the things I'm excited about is, like, how do we design society to unlock human potential? We suck at this as human animals. Like, our education system is a complete joke when you look at it through the filter of unlocking human potential. Our democracy is pretty embarrassing when you look at it as, like, what it should actually be, like unlocking human potential and participatory democracy. We were talking, like, how the hell did we get here in terms of, like, Trump? Like, it's a real, I actually have a lot of ideas about that, and none of them are very optimistic. So how do we build a better society from where we're at is one of my obsessions, I guess.
And it's a large design problem. That is a big design problem. That is a big design problem. I wanted to just open it up to questions. Anybody has? Yes. Wait, I have the mic.
Yeah, I can talk loudly because I'm passionate about this. I absolutely agree with you that our education system is a nightmare. And all of the things that we're trying to do it with adults primarily. And they have gone through what I call ram it. They've gone through 16 years of regurgitate, acculturate, and memorize while you're isolated and threatened. They've learned that your goal is to be the number one person, right, in the whole room to win. So we exhort people. We say, be generous, be heroic. 50% of those people must be below average, except in Lake Wobegon, where Garrison Keillor says everybody's above average. My mission in this life, if I could do one thing, would be change the meme of what we think education is from Ramit to spirit. You go in through people's strengths, passions, and interests, cultivating relationship, celebrating individuality in an atmosphere of trust. I know this isn't a question, but nobody's given up on me yet. And that's the theory of a new system, the structure and process, and this is what's killer. We all know, I was a founding member of YEO. I'm that old, right? My mentor was Ray Hickok, who founded YPO, who looked just like you. And Ray said to me, he looked just like you, tall, elegant, gray-haired, well-dressed, perfect. When he was my mentor, he was dying of cancer. And he said to me, look, I'll tell you this, about all the stuff about YPO and you fly around your hotshot, the most important thing is you have ongoing peer support and you mentor and you're mentored. When you go to school, you don't got no support from nobody. I just read they are expelling people from pre-K. It's like, are we insane? So I totally agree. I think, like Maslow said, we don't begin to know how good people can be.
So it's funny you bring this up. So one of the things I'm working on is this project called Circles, which is a YPO, EO type forum, but it's online and democratized, so you don't have to be a CEO of a company to get the benefit of a personal advisory board. And it's how do we, one of my things is like, how the hell do we re-knit society back together? I'm not even sure it's possible as humans, but I think we have to strive towards a more perfect union if we're going to wake up in the morning and feel good about ourselves, right?
Can I do an add-on? I just got back from New Mexico. One place, we're working on a collaboration to grow entrepreneurs in New Mexico. Oh, I'm sorry, honey. One place that if you want to experiment is Indian reservations.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking to the guys at Navajo Tech. It's a third world country. There's nothing there, and they don't have a lot of regulation. So if you want to try to build new things, that would be a wonderful place to do it.
Great. Yes. Wait, hold on for a mic coming.
A question for Miguel. My name is Ruth Culpaber from Wharton Properties. I'm curious, Miguel, what is your game plan for the future and your company and new centers and we live and we work and?
That's a big question. I mean, I think you can see, we've been growing globally. So I think, we opened China, Korea. We're working on India now. So certainly we believe that the things that we're doing apply. And again, as a goal of trying to empower people, we see that in some cultures, there's a lot more work to do, even in the context of what we do. So I think that gets really exciting when you're thinking, here, say in the United States, we already have established entrepreneurial culture. We have people who are innovating. While we have many failures, at least there are pockets of this. Whereas you could say in a place like Seoul or Tokyo or China or wherever, there are larger cultural struggles that still have to be that have to be that they have to go through as they shift from, say, being focused on huge corporations to smaller business and innovative business. So I think for us, that's kind of engaging in that dialogue on that level. It gets to be really interesting, and it gives us new ways to interact with both our members, but also local economies and local government. So that gets to be more like, it's not society design, but it's actually putting us in that conversation where it's like, if a country or a culture doesn't allow for failure, for example, like if you fail, it's shameful. We've already been like, fail, that's awesome, way to go, start again. If we could be a safe place for failure, for example, and that actually helps shift the culture where the people who are within our community can now act in different ways. That's actually, that's helping to shift society. So I think that's where it gets really fun for us to think in a big way rather than just say like, hey, we're bringing together businesses under one roof. But that said, I think, we have from the start thought about creating a holistic way to support people who we call creators, people who want to do innovative things and bring new things to the world, and that remains our ambition. And that to us has no limitation and no finish line, so we still have a long way to go. We're still at the very beginning.
I will call out Singapore. We're doing a lot of work with them, and design is a big part of their government policies, how they design education systems. Even the city has a lot of design integrative thinking, and they're pumping out schools now that generate designers because they know that's the way to get out of the hole that they are finding themselves in with the shifts happening in Asia. So design, as a society, that's a great one to study.
Italy did that in the late 50s too. They committed, literally the government was like, we're going to build design schools, we're going to invest a ton of money into this. And now everybody, I was in Italy last year, and they were like, and the people are like, I wish the government would do something. And I'm like,
Well, we'll see what happens now because China's been doing so much investment in design in the last 10 years. So we'll see actually if that premise still
they
holds
get an Italy
through in
experience.
that. Yes. Ryan?
Ernesto, I'm curious about how much your team focuses on the notion of design and emotion. I had an interesting experience that actually kind of relates to what your company focuses on. I moved, this was 10 or 15 years ago, but I remember it. I moved, I needed soap for my bathroom. I went to the Dwayne Reed on the next block. There were 20 different options. I don't really care all that much. And I chose Method because it was the only bottle that had any design applied to it. And so I think that that's kind of interesting. I don't know, though, the realities of running a team like yours in a large company like yours and how much shipping and manufacturing and other things that are not exactly directly tied to design and trying to make people love the things that you're putting in the market and interacting with them. I'm kind of curious about how tangential things play a role into any limitations you might experience.
That's a great question. And every single category that we play in is being disrupted right now. I mean, Method was disruptive for its time, and now it's been acquired. I think Unilever bought it, right? Another one? Okay. But they stood out. They decided to be disruptive in the category by just having a very simple design of the packaging and a very simple story around sustainability and no harsh chemicals, et cetera. So that was really, really smart. We have some very established categories that are doing quite well, but we also need to go and reinvent them and maybe even in parallel invent some other brands within those same care categories. So we are working on that. In terms of our team, we're very involved with the supply chain, manufacturing, the formulations. But again, we are not trying to focus so much on the thing. It really is about the experience. And when you look at the experience, that may inform that you need a different thing than the thing that you thought that you needed. So that's the way we're approaching it. And so our design organization is touching lots of things, but J&J is a large company, and we're only going to grow at a rate of influence that makes sense.
And is it your team that does all the design work, or do you use outside designers?
We've got two very large design centers, one in Cincinnati for medical device design and one here in New York City, and that does consumer and a lot of pharmaceutical work. We do partner with outside agencies as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Andrea Glorioso from the European Union delegation. First of all, as an Italian, I would like to point out we still do very good design in Italy. But thanks for reminding.
Busted, Brie.
Unfortunately, many Italian designers are not working in Italy anymore, so we kind of emigrated, unfortunately, and had to go. But anyway, now I would like to go back to a point which was covered a bit tangentially about the notion of failure and how failure is addressed in the current business environment, and that's a criticism that is always often moved to Europe, that failure is lived in a much worse way in the European entrepreneurship environment than it is in the US. And yet, because of my job, I talk a lot with investors here in the US, and behind closed doors, most investors will tell you, well, wait a second, one failure is fine, two failures, we already start to look very carefully at the person, three failures, it's a no-no for us. So my question is, do we actually have numbers that would tell us a little bit more on how failure actually impacts on investment decisions beyond, and I'm not criticizing the notion, but beyond anecdotal evidence, do we actually have that kind of numbers? And if we discover that actually failures are lived in a slightly worse way, even in the US or in Europe, how do we design a system to change that? But the second is a very big question. Maybe the first is more contained as a question.
I've actually never seen, so I'm jumping in on here, I've actually never seen the numbers. That's been a question that's been asked, so that's a project for somebody to take on. But here's what I do know. This notion, I mean, and I was just talking to somebody about this, and we both agree, we call it the F word. Like this notion of failure. First of all, things don't work oftentimes is because there's a process that goes on. And people tend, and when you talk about this whole concept, getting back to design thinking, people tend to run away from the process because the process tells you things you actually don't want to hear. Yep. In my experience, and you guys tell me this, the more experienced and knowledgeable people are at a certain thing, in a certain business, in a certain industry, the less risk adverse they are. And so they think they will tell you what people need to do, they will tell you how people need to behave, they will tell you how products need to work. And the concept of going in and cannibalizing the baby that they've built is really, really hard for businesses. And hence where the failure. So I think you've got to unlock, how does failure actually happen? did they do really what was told? Because I can tell you, most people are afraid to follow the insights that they actually get, that human-centered part. They don't like that part. They don't like what they hear from consumers. It's what we heard before. It's like, make the black band. Make the black band, because like they're telling you to make the black band. But you see that on so many different levels. I don't know. That's just my, having looked at this and worked in so many different organizations, I've seen this over and over and over again.
I think I'll jump in. Failure is an interesting word, and I put it on the time spectrum. If you can iterate quickly, then fail. If you can fail really fast, you can call it iteration, and it's free of guilt, because you know you're improving, and you can call it good. If you stretch things out super long, it becomes failure because you've invested so much and you didn't get a return. So that's still, if you're in a culture where that's accepted, you just pick yourself. And like we're capable of, like, we have bankruptcy. You can really fail in the U.S. You can go really deep, and then just pick yourself up and start again. So there's something special about that. I think the other, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we try not to call it failures so much, but more learnings, right? Because if you do it the right way, you're just learning. It's a series of learnings, and you apply it. And I think you're spot on with the idea of doing it very quickly with low cost, low investment, and then no one gets in trouble, you know? But a lot of companies go in really big, they do deep investments, and it's an 18-month thing, and then they get to the end of that and they realize, oh, well, this won't work in the marketplace. That's not the way to do it. So we have to change the way we develop products and solutions.
There's this great guy who ran Edwards who came up with something called prototyping, which is the idea of prototyping before you actually do anything. So this is like the guy who did the Palm Pilot, made a block of wood that was that was the form factor, and spent like 6 weeks going around pretending it was a Palm Pilot to see if it was functional. Like IBM did this thing where they thought in the late 70s that voice, that dictation, they were going to replace secretaries, was going to be the big computer hit before they committed all of their resources to dictation decoding. They set up a room and had people come in and dictate, and they just had a person behind there, and they just had a person behind there, and they just had a person behind there, and they just had a